Hello, everyone. This is Vikram Prakash, and you are listening to Architecture Talk, this ongoing podcast which has been around now for almost 4 years, which is dedicated to rethinking the possibilities of life on planet Earth, which is my definition of the purposes and project of architecture. In other words, I'm trying to rethink the possibilities of architecture through cross-disciplinary thinking, through pre-disciplinary thinking, and through imagining alternative futures. The last then is the basis of my conversation coming up with the science fiction author SB Divya. Trained as a computational neuroscientist and a person who worked as an electrical engineer in signal processing and such for over a decade, SB Divya is a multidisciplinary thinker whom I ran into when I saw her book, her science fiction novel entitled Meru. She has written a series of science fiction books and has another one coming out soon, which I will interview her about in September. But her books, in general, imagine a future in which technologies are developed based on imaginations of current technology and current science and possibilities that are still unknown but conceivable. So they are not science fiction in the fantasy sense. And nor are they science fiction in the, Philip K. Dick sense, where they essentially posit and deal with the complex social and intellectual challenges that might arise from future science fiction technologies. So eschewing both those sort of poles, what SB Divya does is simply imagine future ways of living and narratives that might arise within that, in particular, in this case, the possibilities of a post-human future in which alloys, or what I would call as human-evolved AI machines, have taken over the governance of the solar system and indeed of the galaxy, but who rule it in a benign. The key thing here, what I'm interested in, is how she produces her fantasy universes. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Here we go.
Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Well, welcome to Architecture Talk, Divya. It's such a pleasure to be having this conversation with you. I don't know how or what. Was it an Amazon algorithm or something recommended? No. It was the Daniel and Jorge Explain the Universe podcast, which I'm a big fan of. And I think you were on it, and I thought, wow, this looks kind of interesting. And I kind of bought it and forgot about it. And then your book showed up, and Meru. And then I think it was sitting on my desk for probably 6 months because, I'm one of those people who buys too many books.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day I thought, okay, let me give you a shot. And once I started to read it, I was just sucked in, drawn deep inside, and I more or less finished it in, well, not literally, but generally, let's just say a setting or two or three.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, thank you for writing this fantastic book. And thank you also for the universe, I think, that you have invented in it, which I find quite enthralling. If you will allow me, please correct me, I describe it as something that builds very rigorously on scientific principles, but also the frontiers of scientific principles, and develops them into the realm of science fiction, where there is a lot of fiction and speculative possibilities. But it isn't kind of outlandish fiction of, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could just
Yes,
roll the universe and make wormholes and switch to alternate universes and so on, which is all fine. I love all that stuff. But for me, it's intriguing that you you have a sort of projective vision of what the future could look like if we built on some of the ideas. So
yeah,
as you know, I used your book in my studio that I'm teaching
right.
this quarter, which is on building speculative futures. And I want to thank you again for interacting with the students, and I hope to bring you back and show you at least a quick tour of what we came up with, which is their own crazy imagination about the things that you provoked.
Well,
So first of
it's
all,
my
thank you.
pleasure to be here. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me and for having me at the studio. I think that was a really fantastic experience.
Thank you. Thank you. So you are a electrical engineer with a background in various things, but it says here machine intelligence, high-speed communication, pattern recognition, digital music, medical devices. Oh my God. And it also says on your website you're a DJ, an oil painter, a Bharatnatyam dancer. You like heavy metal, classical, electronica, jazz. Hello. Such a fantastic description. I wish you had put architecture in there somewhere
Oh,
because maybe in the future.
I
But
wish.
but but tell me your story a little bit. How did you go from being a engineer into this sort of really, I would say, creative thinker?
Well, I would say it started off as a writer first in some ways, or the two developed in parallel because I began reading science fiction around the age of 9 or 10, and I
Mm.
absolutely loved it then. And I started writing a little bit of fiction in my teenage years, which is also around the time that I developed a lot of interest in astronomy and astrophysics. And when I went to college, I fully intended to become an astrophysicist and pursued that for about 2 years before deciding, for a variety of reasons, that maybe that wasn't the best career choice for my life goals. And I didn't really want to be an electrical engineer or a computer engineer. I wanted to do something that had more of a frontier to it, more discoverability. So I ended up cobbling together my own undergraduate degree with a graduate department at the time, computation and neuroscience at Caltech. They,
But let me interrupt you here.
yeah,
As a teen, you were just drawn into this. You said, what? Why?
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 I think
What was?
in part, I have to say, because of the science fiction. When you read about people traveling to the stars and witnessing these amazing things in space, I was absolutely inspired. If I had been stronger and less myopic, literally, my eyesight had been a lot better. I would have probably tried to be an astronaut because I'm also an incurable traveler and I love seeing new places and discovering new things. And so I did a project in 8th grade in my science class on the life cycle of stars. And it was just so fascinating to learn about all that I think it just, between that and the intersection of the science fiction just inspired me to kind of
So in the
pick
eighth grade,
that as
did
a
you
career.
did you have an amazing teacher that brought you in, or is this your family background, or just your friends, or it's just you?
It was just, I think the teacher gave us a list of choices of things that we could do for our
Yeah,
project. And
yeah.
me and my best friend at the time, this was the topic. I don't remember if I chose it or she chose it, but once I started researching it, I just found it really interesting, to think about these enormous, powerful objects so far away from us that we're never going to see it in our lifetime. But to know that they exist, to know how they are born, how they die,
It's mind
I just thought
blowing.
it was
It's
it was really
completely,
incredible, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
and it kind of I felt that same way when I went into computation and neuroscience as my subsequent choice because I was like, we don't know a lot about the brain either.
That's
You know,
right.
physiology, yes, like okay, it's a complex system. There's a lot of details we don't understand, but we kind of have a broad general idea how things work in the body. But how things work in the mind and how do you get from neurons to experience and qualia, that there's a very big gap there in knowledge,
And
to
consciousness
this
from
day.
there.
Right. And what even is consciousness, right?
Right.
And so those kinds of questions have always fascinated me. I was very lucky to get Christoph Koch as one of my advisors before
Mm.
he became famous, um, as an undergraduate. And so, these are questions that he has explored and continues to explore.
Okay.
And I've kind of been delving into them through science fiction, right? Through my writing. In between, I made a living, and I did a lot of interesting applications when it came to machine learning and pattern recognition and signal processing in general, all of which tend to kind of fall under the department heading of electrical engineering for
Sure.
most places. But
Right.
I'm a very bad electrical engineer in that I am not fond of circuits and chip building, and like that's not the part of electrical engineering that excites me. It's really more the algorithms, the mathematics, and where it intersects with biomimicry.
Okay, so connect it all for us. Give us the short line answer of what's the connection between a collapsing neutron star and brain consciousness. What is the odds?
Oh, the connection for me is really that we understand so little about both of them.
Mm.
One is this distant, seemingly irrelevant object, and the other one is absolutely essential to our everyday being. But
Mhm.
both of them are still, at the end of the day, kind of black holes, right? We don't have a good scientific grasp of what is consciousness, what is sentience, what is experience, where do these things come from? How do they arise from the soup, the biochemical soup that makes up our bodies and our brains? And
So you take it only to biochemical soup. You don't say, well, they are both have to be driven by fundamental laws of the universe and the
they
subatomic
do.
particles. Yeah,
No, I do take it to that point as well. I
yeah.
am ultimately a physicalist. I'm not religious. I don't believe in ensoulment. And so I do think there has to be a physical explanation, but I also believe that we don't know everything there is to know about
Oh, for
physics,
sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I feel like every 100 or 150 years, physicists kind of feel like they have it all figured out, and then something comes along and disrupts the models, and we realize we have to think deeper or rethink even some of our assumptions. And so there's probably something underlying consciousness and our experience that maybe we don't understand yet in terms of fundamental physics. I mean, Penrose has some fascinating ideas. Christoph has some fascinating ideas. So there's a lot of cool hypotheses, and I don't even know that I would go so far as to call anything theory yet, because very little of it is testable, right?
But you are
So
sort
yeah,
of
to me,
testing it.
it's just two frontiers, right? Two very out there frontiers of science, that both of which I just found really, really fascinating.
But you are testing them, your hypotheses through science fiction. Yes?
I suppose I'm at least exploring them.
Yeah, not
Yeah,
testing. I
thought
agree.
experiments, I
Exploring,
guess.
thought experiment. So your thought experiments, to what end? So you create these new worlds, and there's a nice story arc. I'm not going to give the story arc away, but it's a love story, guys. I'll let you know. But at a more general level, it seems like you're to me, tell me, what is it you are doing? It seems like you're testing possibilities of futures. Yes, I mean,
Yeah,
what is the sort of the line that connects your speculations or hypotheses about what the world universe is and the stories that you're writing?
I think fundamentally speculative fiction, to me, this isn't the way everybody approaches it, but to me, it is always starts with a what if, you know,
Mhm.
what if this happened? What if the world was this way? What if we discovered something? How does that then affect people? Because I think also stories ultimately are about people and how we interact with the world that we live in. And so the thought experiment, yeah, starts with that postulate, right? With Meru, it was, what if 1,000 years in the future, human beings are no longer the dominant species, and instead our post-human descendants have basically created a new model of civilization, one which is not just post scarcity, but post necessity, one in which they try to do the least harm to their environment, the
Mm-hmm.
fundamental principles in the way that they approach life is different from what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from that sort of seed, I ended up building out a lot of the details of this world. And I tend to go through an iterative process of coming up with the idea, but then coming up with the characters, and then an initial storyline, a plot, and letting the three sort of iterate.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I want the characters or a plot to go in a certain direction, and so I might have to craft the world to allow that to happen in a
Mm-hmm.
plausible way. Sometimes I really want certain aspects of the world to be true, like Podrons, where the alloys don't have any permanent structures. So no
Mm-hmm.
cities, no outposts, no space stations, right?
Mm-hmm.
They come together until and create a temporary structure until it's fulfilled its purpose, and then they split up. And this is intentional. And so that was an anchor point in the world that I wasn't going to violate
Okay.
for plot convenience, right?
Right.
So some things, it's like I said, it's a feedback process, or I often call it a triangle, where I try to balance these 3 points of what is the world like, who are the main characters, and what's their journey, and then what is the plot, what are the events
Right.
of this particular story that have to occur.
So a future world governed by post-human alloys, which is post-scarcity and post-necessity. So everybody is talking about artificial intelligence and, it taking over humanity, and here you have a vision about, artificial intelligence, let's just say in current lingo, simple lingo, taking over not just humanity and our planet, but at least our galaxy and beyond, running everything. And with, if I may say, a kind of a colonial mindset in terms of their relationship to humans, which is that they kind of keep them restricted. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in a paternalistic way. But let's not go there first. First, I want to understand your thinking about post-human alloys as they neither seem dystopian nor utopian.
Mm-hmm.
Neither are they sort of destroying worlds and sort of conquering humanity, but nor are they like in happy collaboration with human beings. So, tell us a little bit more about this.
So I think the one thing I would dispute is shortcutting to say that the alloys are artificial intelligences. They are not. In my mind, they are biological living beings. And there is a third form of sentient intelligence in the universe of Meru, and those are the constructs.
Mhm.
Those are truly artificial intelligences, entirely built out of inorganic matter. They don't reproduce, they have no desire to reproduce, they don't
Mhm.
age, they don't die. But they are intelligent, they are, many of them, imbued with a form of sentience and eventually self-determination as well.
Mhm.
So they have, rights, the rights of a kind of person.
Sure.
The alloys are, they have DNA, they reproduce, they live, they age, they die, they can get sick. And so to me, even though they may incorporate what we consider to be machine parts
Mhm.
today, right? And aspects of their bodies are synthetic, I would still say that they are a form of living being and person. And so I think that's kind of where I conceptualize them as our descendants, right? They've
Mhm.
kind of inherited the mantle from human beings because in the history of this world, in my made up history of this world, at one point human beings were doing such a terrible job of managing the Earth and Mars and their own lives that they kind of decided maybe it's better if we change to stop being so destructive. So
Mhm.
they genetically engineer themselves to try to repress some of those more destructive traits, and they hand over authority willingly to the alloys to say, look, maybe you can do a better job. You don't even have to live on planet Earth anymore. You don't have to live on any planet. You live in the vacuum of space where you don't need a lot of resources and you're not going to cause a lot of damage. And so it's almost reactive situation. And then you get several generations down the line and you end up in the world of the story, or the time that the story of Meru takes place, and you've got more human beings, not a lot, but a few, starting to question the state of the world.
Older decisions.
Right.
So you imagine alloys as sentient beings descended from us, but not through natural selection, right? I mean, they are descended in a sense through bioengineering.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Genetic engineering and bioengineering.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
But still inheriting our Homo sapiens DNA, but then augmenting it with additional chromosomes and instruction sets.
Yeah.
As you kind of pointed out in the introduction, I was trying to take what we know about science today, right?
Yeah.
And thinking 1,000 years in the future, it's going to be pretty wild, right? I'm not going to get any of this right.
Yeah.
But let me think as far out as feels plausible to me. And when I start thinking about genetic engineering, it's like, could we get to a time when we can basically treat genes like Lego blocks, right?
Mhm.
And we can assemble complex living structures however we want, right? Take pieces from sea life, land life, human life, whatever. And the alloys you see on Earth are not human-like almost at all, right? They are, many of them have 4 legs, they have tails, they have multiple stomachs like cows, they can do all kinds of things that are nothing close to Homo sapiens. But a lot of that DNA is taken from life on Earth. And this is not a unique idea to me, right? People have in science fiction come up with chimeras, and even mythologically, we have many creatures that are half animal, half human. So absolutely not claiming this any sort of revolutionary idea of my own, but kind of getting a little bit more, because a lot of Meru focuses on genetics and genetic engineering. I was trying to think of how can we harness DNA to do this? And DNA ultimately is code, right? It's an instruction set to produce bodies.
Sure.
So why not just add more code, right? It would take a lot of trial and error to figure out how to do it in a stable fashion, but eventually you should be able to build more complex bodies with more complex code.
And then you take on the question of then how would we have meaningful relationships, i.e., fall in love with this other kind of descendant of our DNA, right?
Right.
What do you see is the question or the problem or the challenge here? Why take this on as a question?
So the story of Meru was very loosely inspired by the story of Nala and Damayanti from the Mahabharata.
Oh,
in
okay.
which, yeah, I know it's like the bare bones are all that's really left, which is why I would never call it a retelling, right? It's diverged quite far from the source material.
Yeah.
But in that, one of the things that fascinated me about that story are the two main characters. They fall in love, they become a couple, and that happens, fairly early on, like within the first quarter, the first act, right? And then the rest of it tends to be is more about how they get separated and find each other again. And in the case of Meru, the setup is that there's this young human woman who needs to be taken to another planet, and she is carried there by an alloy pilot. And so I was also thinking originally of the alloys as sort of the godlike figures, right? Because they have more, potentially you could say more intelligence, certainly more advanced physical capabilities than a lot of human bodies. They are the guardians of society and the universe. Again, long-standing tradition of human falling in love with God, not very not very
I see.
unusual, right?
Yeah.
Mythologically speaking. And so it seemed natural with these two people, and they are people at the end of the day, going on this journey together, spending a lot of time together, that certainly the human with a humanoid alloy could develop romantic feelings. And then it's a question of, can the alloy return those feelings back to the
Mhm.
human? And that's where the incarn, the avatar of the alloys, right? That looks more human, that allows them to walk on a planet, figured into it because that immediately makes them a lot more relatable to the
Right.
human being, right?
Right.
Well, from my own experience and humanity in general, cross-cultural romance is always an interesting thing to explore. How do two people from very different backgrounds relate to each other? How do they come together? What is it that attracts them to each other? Where do they find common ground? And then eventually that bond, right?
No, no, I'm very familiar with that, given my own personal relationship. It certainly feels more than cross-cultural, but now I'm seeing that, you're picking up, there is a long lineage of humans and divines in the
Right.
Greek history, Indic history, and so on, where people fall in love. So that's a well-established tradition. I didn't really think of alloys as as demi-divine or even divine. I was thinking of them as rigorously just advanced humans in one sense.
In which case, I think it becomes, even more plausible, right? We also have plenty of science fiction where humans fall in love with aliens,
Well, aliens of no, but
right?
I was looking at
Um,
the opposite issue. It's like
right,
we are advanced monkeys, aren't we?
right.
Right? But we don't find people talking about falling in love with monkeys, or do we?
I think maybe you would say it's a different kind of love, but we absolutely do fall in love with animals the way we fall in love with children or the way we might love family. You know,
Mhm.
the it's a
Sure.
it's still love, it's just it's maybe a different kind of love. So romantic love has to, I think, happen between two people who at least at some level see each other as having some parity, some way to relate to each other as equals. And I don't think most of us would see monkeys and apes as equals just because the communication is a bit of a problem. But that's where I think aliens, gods, mythological creatures like, mermaids and centaurs, all of these who have intelligence and the capability of speech are much easier for humans to fall in love
Sure.
with in stories.
Yeah, because also you created the go-between of the avatar, which makes
Right.
good sense. Then then that makes engagement possible. So that's interesting. If we go in the other direction, one could have even read this as a question of transgression of normativities. This is not supposed to happen. So in
Right.
that sense, it's transgressive. And it seems like even in the Meru world you created, it is considered transgressive. I mean, certainly the allies seem to have like, oh, why would you want to have anything to do with those lowly humans? So,
Yes, especially the alloy main character's best friend
yeah, yeah,
does
yeah,
not
yeah,
have a favorable attitude towards humans. I would say some of the other alloys are more just puzzled, right?
yeah.
Rather than being condescending, they're just kind of like, really?
Yeah.
This works for you? Right? But
Right.
we have so many examples of that in human history, right? Just not very long ago in the United States, where
Sure.
white people would look unfavorably upon relationships between another white person and a black person because
Correct. Correct.
the black people were considered subhuman at some level or too much of the other. And so
Mhm.
yeah, so it is a little bit transgressive. It's certainly something that both of those characters will question within themselves whether it's wise, right, and whether it makes sense.
And the story arc is involves wombs and new progeny between between our main characters, and you have a liberal conversation around that and discussion of a lot of wombs. in your narrative. So reproduction and reproductive technology and love and connection to reproduction is vastly explored. What were your thoughts? Why is that of particular interest in this context?
So going way back, not that my career is that long, but long enough, right? 10 years. 10 years back, I wrote a very short story called The Egg. That was my one and only publication in Nature. They have a futures column at the end of every issue of Nature, which is a short one-page science fiction story. And The Egg was all about an artificial womb and a couple and their fetal infant. And I think I've always been intrigued by the idea of being able to reproduce outside the human body. And I think a lot of people have, right? This is, again, not a new idea anywhere in science fiction. It is, to some people, an abomination. To others, it would be a great gift, right?
Sure.
People who are not able to conceive or women who are not able to carry to term. I think it raises a lot of interesting ethical questions in the modern context of life, conception, abortion, all of that comes into play. But in this far future, one of the things I wanted to change, one of the things I really wanted as an anchor point in the world building is that the alloys should be able to exist in the vacuum of space, right? They're not in a space station, they're not in a vessel, they're not on a planet with atmosphere. They are in hard vacuum with their bodies, and they can survive this. So then I started thinking about, how are they going to reproduce in this kind of environment, right? Because reproduction involves opening up a lot of parts of the body to different things. And I thought, with all this genetic engineering and tinkering they're doing, it would make a lot more sense if they just had an external womb, right?
Right.
A device that can grow a fetus, give birth to it, right? Make sure everything's okay, and then let it out into the vacuum of space.
Right.
And so that's where this idea of this external womb came from. And then I added this layer of, well, once you have a womb, could it also help with aging or sickness? And so that's where this rebirth idea came for the alloys, where if they are sufficiently, their bodies are damaged, or if they're just getting very old, they can potentially choose to be reborn. It comes with certain costs, but it's another option, right? And so once the womb exists outside the body, I think it begs the question for human beings on Earth, how many of them are still going to choose to carry an infant to term within their bodies? And I think there will always be some people who make that choice, right, for whatever reasons. And then there will be others who might choose to make use of this technology. So the womb will be able to produce all kinds of life, potentially.
You also talk about, one of your axioms, I think, is axioms of life, or the principle. Yeah, I think it's the axioms, is about everything, all matter possesses some level of consciousness. Yeah, all matter. So to say that every piece of dust on any planet or every center of a collapsing black hole possesses consciousness. Where is this idea anchored? Other than in panpsychism generally, I want to know in physics, where is this idea anchored, and what's your interest in it?
So my interest came from panpsychism and hearing Philip Goff speak on a podcast. And I thought, this is very interesting, especially coming from Eastern philosophy, or I would say actually a lot of indigenous philosophy too, right? Which tends to attribute consciousness or souls or spirits to everything in the world, including inanimate objects. And so, when I heard about panpsychism first, and Philip Goff specifically considering it in a way as potentially a natural law, I just became very intrigued. And so this was a big what if question that I wanted to explore in Meru. What if this is true? How does that change the way society might approach its interaction to its environment? Right now, we are in a world that embraces the philosophy that the earth was made for humans, for our consumption and for our dominance. And that is our right as human beings. And so, because of that approach, we have fewer qualms about eradicating other species, about encroaching on their land, about pollution, mining, etc. Right? So, in
No,
this
but
far
this is
future
a
world, I was like, what if the society is predicated on very different principles? If we assume that everything around us has some degree of consciousness, and something like a planet has a significant degree of consciousness just because of its mass, it just may not present the same way that we experience consciousness. What rights then do we owe that planet? How do we choose to treat it? And so that's where it came into the axioms, and I wanted to really put it in the front matter of the book that, okay, I am planting this flag that in this future people accept these things as truth and fact and part of science, and from there follows everything else.
no, I get that, but so you're locating it in philosophy, in conceptual thinking, not in physics. Then,
I am. There are some physicists, I don't know who all, but I know for sure Roger Penrose is one of them, who think that this could possibly be true at a quantum level.
yeah,
And so, again, we kind of go back to, this is one of those places that there's a lot of unknown, so there's a lot of room for speculation by the author.
yeah, no, that's true. I read the Karen Barad. Have you read Karen Barad?
I don't think so.
She's also a subatomic particle physicist turned queer feminist theorist.
Okay.
So she does specific reading of Bohr and the
Mm.
two-slit experiment to
Mhm.
argue that the observation informed transformation of light as wave or particle is evidence of a certain kind of consciousness.
Yes, I think that's where Penrose's theory comes from too. So maybe they're on the same page, so to speak.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
I
it's
mean,
it's
anyway,
really fascinating, right? I mean, we don't know what we're going to learn and discover as we get deeper into understanding ourselves and
right.
and our physics.
And our physics. Yeah. Okay. But there's also, you also have this concept of, I think you call it reality transiting. So transiting reality, which I loved as a phrase from this reality, which seems to be kind of again, I'm asking, is it, or does it originate in physics? Because quantum physics seems to suggest that there is nothing is, everything is a sort of a response to underlying fields. Even subatomic particles are simply sort of movements in the field or sort of differential
Right.
interactions with the field. And then you suggest that using that fact of physics to transit between places or between realities can be achieved by what seems to me a kind of a deep meditative state. Is this a fair reading? A kind of trying to
Yeah,
mix field theory with meditation?
I think that's a pretty good way of encapsulating it. I would say that rather than field theory, though, what I was considering is the probabilistic nature
Mm,
of quantum mechanics, that there is a probabilistic distribution underlying that field, right? Of
right.
where these particles exist, where they move. And I was also thinking about multiverse, multiple realities, that type of conception, how quantum might translate to a reality that we can understand and experience. And so, if it's true, right, that everything is probabilistic, and if I'm going to digress for a minute and say, I recently was reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy audiobook with my teenager and my spouse on a long car ride, and I'd forgotten that Douglas Adams has this improbability drive, right? And that is how his ship moves vast distances very quickly. And
Uh,
in some ways, that's actually kind of what I was thinking in this case too, is as improbable as it is, you could find a reality where instead of you being at location X1, Y1, Z1, you're at location X2, Y2, Z2,
Yeah.
all other things being basically the same,
Mhm.
especially if you're doing this in vacuum where there's very little
Interference.
particulate, yeah,
Yeah.
activity around you, right?
Yeah.
And very little field interference as well, for that
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
So that's why the reality transits happen, outside the heliosphere, right? Past the influence of the sun's radiation and gravitation. And the meditative state was me not wanting to have like a hyperdrive or, the usual sort of mechanistic modes of
Mm.
transportation. I was a big fan of Dune in my teenage years, right? And in that, he has the navigators take this drug and they fold space time to
Mm.
move themselves in an entire ship from one place to another.
Mm.
And I always thought that was interesting. And I know that Herbert was influenced in the 60s by a lot of Eastern philosophy. And again, with my own background, I was like, well, I don't want an engine, and I don't want these people to have an engine. I want them to be able to, through consciousness, right? If consciousness really is an underpinning physical force, then there ought to be a way to perceive it. And once you could perceive it, if you can also manipulate or kind of calculate these probabilistic realities and find the one where you want to go, you're not folding space-time so much as you're transiting reality, right? You're moving from one reality to another where you're no longer in the location where you started, you're somewhere else. And instead of a spaceship, the alloy body moves, but it's such a large body if you're a pilot that you can carry other people inside you so they move with you. So it was really just me trying to be clever and come up with a different mode of transcending the speed of light, right? Because I was really bored of the typical science
Yeah.
fictional approaches to this. Not
Yeah.
that there's anything wrong with any of them. I just wanted to, mess around and come up with something of a little bit of my own. And obviously taking inspiration, sometimes even subconsciously from elsewhere. But yeah, something physically plausible, but a little bit outlandish at the same time.
Right. I enjoyed the kind of science consciousness, as you described it just now, consciousness as a real thing and how to
Right.
use that as the basis of thinking about, I don't know, as a material property of the world almost.
Yes, absolutely.
And therefore, if it is a material property of the world, therefore, how can we manipulate and do it? Which, I find an extremely persuasive concept, which therefore also connects to the idea, therefore, everything has to have consciousness if it's a material property of the world. So then you
Right.
can have planets and black holes and neutron stars and everything. And space itself maybe has consciousness of
Yeah,
its own kind.
right. Just not one that we perceive the way we perceive our own consciousness, right?
That's right, and our consciousness is sort of a narrow bandwidth in a vast spectrum, possibly,
Yeah.
is an idea that just makes sense to me at a sort of dumb, ordinary level. Like, how could we have consciousness as something other than as a property of the, because certainly consciousness exists. There's no question about that. It's not a made
Well,
up
it
thing.
is, no, I think it's up for debate. I mean, if I have to stick with what we know today, I
Yeah.
would say that consciousness is an emergent property of the way our brains are structured and the way we experience and interact with our environment. And so it's really kind of almost an illusion in that sense, right? It's not a physical property, it's simply how we interpret our existence, right? And how our brains allow us to live and thrive and cope with our existence
Mhm.
and to survive. So I just think that the idea of consciousness being a natural property is really cool and it's fun to explore. I don't think we have any evidence for that yet. So yeah, so I mean, if I'm going to speak with the neuroscience that I've learned and with what I understand about physics today, I would say that no, consciousness is not really, it's not real. It's very much qualia and experiential, the same way something like intelligence is, or even emotional labels that we put like love and anger and sorrow. These are all ultimately just biochemical states. and we need a way to communicate those states to each other because that helps our survival as a species. And so we come up with these labels, right? So there is a thing which is in a state that we call unconscious, and there's another thing that is in a state that we call conscious. But we've been moving the definitions of intelligence and consciousness and sentience around since the beginning, right? Everybody's wondered, going back to the Rig Vedas, going back to the ancient Greeks, everybody's always wondered, what are these experiences, and why do we share them, and why does it seem like a rock isn't ever conscious, but do we really know that for a fact? This is the same way that we question animals and whether where do they rank on intelligence, right? And we keep, I feel, discovering as time goes on that they are generally more intelligent than we give them credit for. There's recent news about sperm whales and the complexities
Yeah, I
of their
saw that.
language, right?
The alphabet,
And
yeah.
everyone's like, oh, wow, who knew sperm whales could be so smart? And it's just like, okay, well, we taught apes sign language. We've taught chimpanzees. We've taught a lot of primates the rudiments of language. Obviously, they had the capacity for it. There are many, many animals that, as we study them further, are using tools in various capacities, right? There are animals that are passing knowledge down, like gained knowledge, wisdom down to their offspring. So things that we used to think were very unique properties of human beings clearly are not. And now we are reproducing intelligence in machines, and it's making people deeply uncomfortable because it certainly seems to mimic human intelligence in some ways, but also not in other ways. It's an alien form of intelligence. But it's doing things that we used to consider the unique province of a human brain. So where does that leave us?
Right.
And
No,
where does
those are
that leave these definitions? And so, yeah, I think, I don't know. I still think we kind of have to make do today with the best of the knowledge that we have today. And while panpsychism and universal consciousness is cool, and I think it could benefit us in society to try to have some regard for that, I don't think there's much evidence for it yet as a theory.
okay. No, and I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but even as an emergent phenomenon, you use the word almost an illusion. Like it can't, emergent phenomena aren't illusions, right?
They
So
are, I would say, conveniences. So in a way, it's an illusion, like all of thermodynamics. That's my favorite example, right? You have millions of atoms moving around in a jar, and then we decide that the average kinetic energy is something we call temperature. And when we touch it, it's hot or cold because that's how we experience that kinetic energy. But at the end of the day, it's still just a bunch of atoms or molecules flying around in a jar. And there isn't really such a thing as hot or cold. Those are emergent properties. Temperature is an emergent property that makes it really convenient mathematically to deal with this as a model.
Sure.
Right.
Sure. There isn't a property such as hot and cold, but it is still an experience. Okay, or differently, there can be so many other emergent systems everywhere in the cosmos, correct?
Right. Yes,
which are
absolutely.
not
like weather.
well, weather certainly, but I don't know. The Big Bang could be an emergent phenomena.
Sure.
I don't know what's going on in that jar as an emergent phenomena, or in the sun with its fantastic solar flares. I don't know if you saw the aurora down in California. But
Sadly, well, not down where we are. It was cloudy too.
Well, it was amazing here.
I know, I saw the pictures. Very jealous.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it is an emergent phenomena that works for us, it can only work because somehow it emerges out of the systems of the real world.
Sure.
Which therefore suggests that it has got to work for everywhere else also. It can't be only working for us, is
Right.
my thinking, right? To me, from an outsider, it seems like emergence nevertheless has somehow, in some way, to be indexed.
Yes.
Physics. It just can't be like whatever you want it to be.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I didn't mean illusion in the sense of false. I meant illusion more like an optical illusion, where there is something happening, but our perception of it is a little bit different than what exactly is going on.
Well, maybe nothing is actually going on there. It's only emergences of various kind. So it seems to suggest, like, it's various ways in which the world gets apprehended. It seems, perhaps,
Right,
is my
exactly.
thinking about it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I it's interesting because we can generally agree on what lack of consciousness looks like, even in a human being, right? A person who is unconscious or a person who's dead is basically someone who's not responsive to the
Hmm.
environment. But we have a much harder time pinning down what consciousness means.
Sure. But tell me, you talked about picking up ideas from Nala Damayanti and cross-culturality, cross-cultural relationships and so on and so forth. One of the things that I found very intriguing, though I never quite figured out, was your singular use of Sanskritic names everywhere and of Sanskritic titles in the books and Devanagari, Sanskritic script on the headings of every chapter.
Right.
Okay, so you and I, we are both South Asian and we love our background, but what is it you're trying to do as a literary device here in the novel?
So there were two things. One, it started out because this is from an ancient Sanskrit epic. I was already in the mindset for naming the characters. And one other factor was my senior year of high school. I was taking classes at the University of Minnesota, and I had the great pleasure of taking 1 year of Sanskrit and actually studying it. And so I kind of wanted to just dust off my own. And then the last thing was I was thinking about the alloys and the fact that they have, this extended memory capacity beyond their organic brains to store information. And I was like, once you have that, you could stick all kinds of stuff in there. And these are very long-lived beings. So just like any society, there's going to be trends and fads. And so I was like, what if they had trends of resurrecting old semi-dead or dead languages? And that kind of becomes a fashion trend for a while. So you name your children from that language. Maybe people even actually learn to converse in it. And so I kind of put the three things together and was like, okay, so this is going to take place at a time when, this is the trend amongst the alloys is like, oh, let's bring back ancient Vedic Sanskrit as kind of a cool thing. And so that's where the chapter headings and some of the names and stuff all kind of come into
So, as
play.
a literary device, you're trying to make ancient Vedic Sanskrit cool for the new millennials of of
Yeah.
the science fiction world. Yes, do I read you?
I think it's more just injecting a little part of my heritage into my work in a way that hopefully is plausible and fits with this world.
Yeah. Well, that was a beautiful part of the whole literature. I thought so fantastic to do that. I was moved by it because it resonated with some things. When I teach South Asian history, I always tell my undergraduate students, at least, that I'm not going to run any exams on you, and this class is not about teaching narratives about them there. I'm trying to give you knowledge and information which is potentially, hopefully, interesting to you, your lives, and your futures.
Mhm.
So take all the things that I'm showing you and design me a contemporary structure which you would like to be in.
Right.
Because I think it's a big problem that often enough, when we are talking about futurity, we need hyperdrives, Western
Right.
sort of technology. And when we need kind of weird, cool concepts, then you can bring in the Hindus. But it's good to sort of ancient stuff. So it's
Right.
this that sort of division is not productive. So it was fantastic just to see both the language, the script, and the names up front and center. So
Yes, I was very happy that my publisher, my editor actually were willing to work with me on getting the script right because so back in that high school day, after my first quarter of Sanskrit, my mother actually ended up auditing the class with me because she had studied Sanskrit in high school and she's always been interested in languages. And so she and I kind of put our heads together for my chapter titles to make sure I think she has either she has a copy of the Monier Williams dictionary or she just helped me out looking it up online to make sure I got the characters right, because the Devanagari script is not the modern Hindi script, right? There are
Sure.
some nuances, and my publisher picked a specific font and laid out the book and sent me the proofs. And so, I forget what, I was super busy with something at that time. So I was like, please, mom, can you look these over and make sure they're right? Because I had given it to them in a certain script and they had translated it to a different font. And so, yeah, so she cross-checked it, and then we finally found a font that worked for all the words that I needed to have. And I actually ended up changing, I think, one of the chapter titles just because they were like, there was not a good standard font that the publisher could go to print with that would use the word that I originally had. So these are kind of the vagaries of publishing that kind of reared its head. But genuinely, like, I thought it was really great that they were willing to work with me on getting it right, because that was important to me.
Fantastic. So I'm reading the last line of your official bio for the last question here, which is like, it says, she enjoys subverting expectations and breaking stereotypes whenever she can.
Right.
Uh, so I know you have another book coming out, and I'm hoping to do another podcast conversation on that in the future. So what's going on? What's brewing? What's coming next? What sub expectations are you subverting for
Right.
us?
Well, then the next book is Loka, and it is a follow-up to Meru. It's not a direct sequel. There's a time skip. The main characters are different. And this book really explores life on Earth. In Meru, our main character, Jayanti, starts off on Earth, but very quickly she takes off, and it's a big space adventure, which is awesome. But I realized I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about or showing what life is like for human beings on Earth. Are they happy?
Mm,
Are they not happy? What does it mean to have these sort of advanced guardians, in stewardship of our planet, right? They're
I
not
see.
they're not ruling over it in the traditional sense. And so Loka is basically about this young girl, 16, 17-year-old girl, and her friend who circumnavigate the globe, the Earth.
Mhm.
And it's kind of a travel log. It's a bit of around the world in 80 days. They're doing this challenge. And
Mhm.
and so you get to see different parts of the Earth on their journeys, and you get to see how human beings are living, which ones are happy. Loka is the what I call the managed portions of Earth. So the alloys haven't gotten to the point where they've transformed all of the Earth back to its more natural state from where it was during the industrial, digital, and gene mod eras, right? And then there are these out of bounds zones that are less managed, and where humans are a little bit freer to live in their own ways. And so you can also get to see the contrast between those two. And in terms of, oh gosh, breaking stereotypes and expectations, I mean, when I conceived of this universe in general, I wanted life on Earth to have solved a lot of the problems we're grappling with today. And so, on the face of it, to seem like a utopia by some people's standards in the
Mhm.
present day, right? But there's never such a thing as utopia. Somebody's always going to be dissatisfied, right? But I also wanted those dissatisfactions to be not stereotypical. This is not your, like, we're rebelling against the overlords type of situation. The overlords in this case are first of all not lording it that much, and second of all, I think by most objective modern day standards, doing good things.
Yeah.
So this
Yes,
is
I work.
so this next book is, it's another adventure story, except this time rather than a space adventure, it's a little bit more ground bound adventure, and still exploring, what does it mean to be human? All of my favorite themes. What does it mean to be free? Where does the individual fit in the larger fabric of society? And the main character really somewhat coming of age and finding her place in the universe.
All right. Well, fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I have it. And once I've read through the whole thing and the book is out, I'm looking forward to having another conversation with you about it. So
Awesome. Yeah, it'll be out August 13th, so hopefully we'll reconnect in the fall.
it's around the corner. Thank you for all your work. Congratulations for Meru. Thank you for again being part of our studio and for recording this conversation with me.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Mary Lee. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.